Hello, my name is Malika Redmond, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Women Engaged. And we are celebrating our 7-year anniversary doing the work of voter engagement, reproductive justice policy advocacy, leadership development among Black women, girls, and femmes in the city of Atlanta. And we're so excited to, really talk about our impact, to talk about, how we have over the last 7 years build political power among Black women, girls, and femmes, and how that work has meant to the issues that are most important to our lives. But we don't do this work alone. We do this work in partnership with a lot of great organizations and leaders of those organizations across the state of Georgia. And today we get a chance to have a real intimate conversation with someone who's one of my favorite people and leader, Black woman, who runs an organization called Pro Georgia. The Pro Georgia Civic Engagement Table, in which Women Engage is a member of, does the kind of work to coordinate organizations across the state of Georgia who do voter empowerment work with each other, with the kind of technical assistance and funding to be able to be most effective at our work. And so today we're going to get a chance to really talk about, what does it mean to do this work really out of love for our communities and in partnership with each other. And, and what the 7-year impact of Women Engaged has been in this collaboration and effort. And, I just really want to thank Tamieka. We are excited to be here with you today. And, I think about us, and I think about us as moms, as leaders of beautiful, bright, young Black girls, my daughter Amira, and your two lovely daughters, Olivia and Layla, and our powerhouse moms who have our back, Miss Valerie, my mom, and your mom, Miss Bernadine, who has adopted me as well. And so I'm just so happy to have you here today, and thank you for coming and talking to me about our anniversary and our work collectively as leaders.
Thank you, Malika, for having me, and I'm just so excited to be here.
Yay, this is cool. So I'm thinking one thing that we can do to start off with is talk about, maybe just retrospectively looking back, because wow, from 2014 to 2021, could we have imagined where we'd be as a state? But just thinking about that time early on in our work, what maybe the top 3 words that come to mind for you about Women Engaged and our efforts in the community?
Well, Malika, when I think about Women Engaged, and I think about you, Malika Redmond, and the work you've done in your heart, the top 3 words that come up for me are definitely consistency, authenticity, and love. One of the things I've always admired about Women Engaged is you all developed a very clear strategy. And your words, we want to go deep and not wide. You have, unapologetically prioritized Black women, girls, and femmes in the city of Atlanta. And whereas, just to keep it real, sometimes the investment for our type of voter engagement, how we do it, right, in a way that's not transactional but meaningful, we attract resources and funding on sexy, attractive years, right? Presidential election years, statewide years, but, never, for municipal elections, smaller elections that really have immediate impact on our communities. And Women Engaged has said, no, we know that we have to be there year-round in conversation and building relationships with our folks, regardless of how others view which elections matter and which don't. And I think that speaks to, again, that love you have, for us, that authenticity. You're going to do this work in a real way, and that consistency, whether it's rain or shine, Women Engaged is a known quantity in the city of Atlanta. And so I admire you all for that. And you've done, that's hard work in 7 years. That's hard work, and it's hard work.
Yeah, oh, thank you. I appreciate that, because it is hard, but it is also very much heart work. It's really the center of what we do and why we do it. And we can't do that alone. And we know that as leaders, as Black women who are leading such critical work in our state, we also need each other. And, you know, it's just been such a gift to have you as someone to really be able to work closely with, who share the same kind of values, you know, and an advocate to bring in the kind of resources to make sure that, you know, we do get the kind of support on these sort of off sexy election years, because that consistency is so important in our communities. And so I'm just curious, like, how do you navigate that? How do you do that?
You know, to be very honest, so, you know, I'm now going to tell our story.
Yes.
I would have never known about the Pro-Georgia State Table if it wasn't for you. When I worked at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, we were on the same floor, right, in one of the community buildings where all of the struggling grassroots orgs were, right, all the ones that are building up. And, you know, at that time, domestic workers in Georgia, many of them fell in the coverage gap with the Affordable Care Act. And so Medicaid expansion, expanding Medicaid became a priority for domestic workers in Georgia. And, you know, you and Women Engaged were also invested in expanding Medicaid, right? It was of utmost, you know, necessity, frankly, and survival. It still is, right, for our shared community. And you came down the hall to the office to visit, you know, because we would just wander when we needed some fresh air and some, like, you know, little pick me up, right? When sometimes we'd feel down. And you talked to me about the state table that you had recently joined. And you recommended NDWA to become a table partner through the Medicaid expansion work group. And to this day, they are still at the table and active, right? Under the leadership now of Jacqueline Israel. To me, that's an example of how I do it is not alone. You know, Malika, you served as my board chair for 4 years, my entire time as executive director. And, you know, again, we're having a real candid conversation.
That's right.
To have a Black woman as the chair and a Black woman as the executive director of a robust, statewide, impactful civic engagement coalition. Some folks loved it. Some folks were a little apprehensive.
That's right.
But I didn't have to bear that by myself. That was something that we shouldered together. We strategized around. You know, whenever I was confused, you were able to help me break down to the nitty gritty. What is the win? What is our purpose, right? How do you supported me in reorienting. How do I get, right, the most amount of support and care for communities of color? How do I, because you know my own personal mission is lift up Black women as priority within the civic engagement world, right? We are too many times counted on to vote year after year, but none of our priorities ever make it to the table, right? And enough is enough, right? And then that's mirrored with which civic engagement organizations receive consistent and, you know, bountiful resourcing, right? And so, and I know I'm preaching to the choir right now, but you know, and to have a safe space to come to as I jumped into my first executive director role, you know, I couldn't have done it without you.
Oh.
And that's how I did it. I had partnership. You know?
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you, Tamieka.
It's true.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. It is so important to be able to have that safe space, like you said, to be able to talk about, you know, issues that are complicated at times, that are, but also sometimes, you know, we're being pulled in a lot of different directions. And it is difficult to try to think about those things in a silo. You need to be able to have a listening ear. And I appreciate that you have also been that for me as we navigate this work. You know, let me just talk a little bit about, because I'm thinking about, because we have so much to celebrate. We have so much to celebrate. And, you know, where I would love to start about that is how, you know, we have been able to, through our partnership, really bring more Black women, emerging leaders into the fold of this work. And, I think people need to know that, because I think that that's also important. And Black women, but also other women of color. And, there's been a couple of different initiatives that have been able to do that. But I would love for you to, let's talk a little bit about, what does that mean to prioritize us unapologetically and make sure that we see more of us in these critical roles and spaces.
I think that, what it takes, what it looks like for us to be in these roles and spaces of leadership unapologetically can look so many different ways. And so much of that is still, I think, unanswered as we all experiment, explore, and I think become less fearful to bring our whole selves into these spaces.
That's right.
I know one of the things that, two things in particular where I have received a lot of support from you and Women Engaged, and also I think as an organization, Women Engaged laying a different kind of a different kind of founding and grounding so that there is space for women like me to be creative about what it takes. You all, Women Engaged, led the first reproductive justice training at the civic engagement table, right?
Yeah.
And that is not a small thing, and we had massive participation, right? And it was not only the reproductive justice organizations that came to the table.
That's right.
Right, that came to this training. And I think that began the conversation about how do we talk more about gender justice, reproductive justice, how do we think more about many of our intertwining issues, right? From healthcare, right, to immigration. How do we hold all of that within a reproductive justice framework and see the possibilities if a variety of organizations could share the same kind of political framework within our many communities, right? And then you look at that training was, I think, 2015?
2016.
2016. Now you fast forward to 2021.
Yeah.
Oh, no, 2020.
Yes.
And, with your support, right, and that affirmation, Pro Georgia was able to do the first, of its kind, a child care fund, right? And, the intent behind that, and, we did do a survey to make sure the intent matched the impact, right? But the intent was that women of color are living at the intersection.
Yeah.
We have so many titles and roles, and we are being pulled at and drained with these expectations to carry all of the burdens, right, in all of these different spaces. And on top of that, be, leaderful leaders in the midst of a pandemic.
Yes.
When we don't even know what's happening with our elders, we don't know what's happening with our children, their schooling, their safety, and much less even take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
Now we have to take care of our employers, our community, our sisters, and that's the impact, I think, starting from bringing reproductive justice into the psyche of Pro Georgia, that 4 years later, we can contemplate and think about, can we do a child care fund?
Yeah.
And we were able to raise and distribute $300,000.
Yes.
And it allowed employers, right, to be able to support, to offset the cost of childcare expenses.
Yeah.
Right? To at least allow for employees who had children at home to have some support. If they had a family member caretaking, right? That's labor and that's work. But that starts from that seed of what is reproductive justice.
Yes,
and so
absolutely.
Women Engaged has held that for the entire coalition of 40 organizations.
Wow.
Yep. For the last 7 years, right? So I think that's another way that I think too often can be a invisible or unspoken way that your impact as an organization has rippled out and impacted so many other organizations in Georgia.
And I appreciate that, what you just said, because it has me also thinking about, from the RJ training, from reproductive justice training, and then moving into sort of the evolution into having the work group that was prioritizing, because I think the other thing that often happens in our work is, doing this kind of work in silos, where if we're going to talk about racial justice, we're only talking about racial justice. But when we do, then there's this way in which gender gets left out. We've got to, and what we're saying is, yes, we need to talk about racial justice. We need to talk about economic justice We need to talk about access to health care, but we need to talk about it at the intersection of those, because when we do that, we don't leave people out. When we don't do that, we leave folks out of our strategies, of our communication. It happens. And so I think that that's the other piece. And nationally, what we saw, because I know, we've been to a lot of meetings together where people have said, how are you doing that in Georgia? Can you tell us how we can do this here in this state or in that state? How have you been able to prioritize? We have women of color, Black women, who are the backbones of all of our organizations doing the work. But centering the issues that are intimate and paramount to our lives, we still haven't been able to figure that out, how to do that as a coalition. How are you all doing that in Georgia? And, the bottom line is that, frankly, from my point of view, the magic has been in our partnership, honestly, to be unapologetic about, hey, we're just going to do it. We're just going to do it. And I think there's something to that. And then, like you said, others have started to take that on. I wanted to ask you too, in thinking about that, and let's go right into like what was 2020, and all of what was 2020. But I dare to say that all of our work leading up to that prepared us for those moments. But maybe we can talk a little bit about, like, honestly, like, the highs and lows, the in-betweens, the real deal of, like, the resilience. But, like, honestly, for me, a lot of it was painful at the same time, sometimes I don't, it wasn't like, some of it I was working on with muscle memory. So it was like, but needed to have someone, and you were that person to be able, like, to just down to, we got to shut down our offices, and we're doing this ahead of anybody else, and we're probably going to make some folks mad, but we got to send our people home. Like, can we talk about that a little bit? I know it's emotional, but I think people need to understand, what that meant.
Black women and women of color are not celebrated for taking risks. We are not allowed to pause. It is often seen as a failure, that we don't have strategy at our fingertips, or that we are not at the forefront of every action, rally, moment, right? And all of that is how white supremacy values shows up in our organizations. And, I believe, we both individually have our practice of countering white supremacy culture in our organizations. And, then the two of us working together meant that neither one of us had to survive 2020 as Black leaders alone. And, I think it meant that we were able to affirm each other with experimentation. I remember thinking, are we supposed to go back to the office now? I'm not sure, right? Because to be frank, foundations were going back to the office. And so there started to be the initial, what are you doing, right? And I remember you and I having a conversation, and you said, well, listen, and you started reciting the statistics about how Black communities are still negatively impacted by COVID because we are still in a pandemic, people. And that gave me the courage, right? The strength, the audacity to go back and say, no, we are not going back in the office, right? I think about the uprisings. In May. And we had to figure out, like, I think the civic engagement world, not our partners, mind you, right? But the larger world, it's like, this is we should get these folks to vote. Completely missing the justified rage that people had, the heartbreak and disappointment, right, that folks were experiencing with the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. Thank God we've gotten some justice for Ahmaud Arbery, which will never bring him back, and countless others, right? And I remember having conversations with you, like, Malika, I know I'm supposed to be about how do we get these people to vote, but I also like these are my people. It's
Yes.
not the people, it's my people.
Yes.
And I need them to be safe.
Yes.
Because COVID is still rampant. You know, I might be able to, you know, get some masks.
Yep.
We could put the hashtag. We can put information about where to vote.
Yep.
But between you and me, how do we keep our communities safe while they're out there? And you said, go on and make it happen.
Yep.
We don't get those spaces enough. You know, I think about, I go on and on. I think about, you know, I had my 1 month sabbatical. If you remember, this was planned pre-COVID, and I was like, maybe I shouldn't take it. And you were like, nope, you need to take it. And when I started to come back, I was like, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can come back. I don't know how I single parented 2 children through all the shenanigans and up and down, because we were all struggling with schools. And then to be able to come back and be this full-time, triple full-time executive director. You know, I mean, Malika, I remember I would be in my pajamas for a week straight because crack of dawn, I'm raising money to make sure canvassers for all of our partners can stay employed.
Yes.
Right, because everything shifted.
Yes.
You can't do in-person voter registration, then we don't need these canvassers that we asked you to hire in January.
And then let me just say that too, because that's such a critical point. Women Engaged was able to, through the 2020 pandemic, keep everyone working.
Yes.
We didn't have to furlough, we didn't have to send anyone home, other than sending folks home not to work in an office. We were able to make sure folks had equipment and coordinate that. That doesn't happen alone. We did that together as leaders, you know, and you did that at the level of Pro Georgia to make sure that, I mean, statewide, there was an opportunity for partners to be able to have the kind of, you know, you know, the protective gear, masks, sanitizers, the like, but also equipment. And that tech equipment means, you know, laptops. It means cell phones. It means, you know, iPads and, you know, the kinds of things that folks need to be able to continue to do the work from home. And so I just want to make that known that, you know, part of what we were also able to really do while the world was having to lay people off or fire people, or, you know, people didn't know if they were going to be able to get their paychecks or get unemployment or all of those things, that we were able to keep our staff, maintain that, and maintain people working through that, and even be able to provide emergency assistance. So again, to where the caregiver fund and those kinds of things, and make those cases with our funding partners who perhaps otherwise, it's not part of a sort of a traditional funding strategy. And I just want to highlight that, that's so important, and that there's so many lessons from 2020 that I'm looking forward to continuing to take on, you know, as we go forward. But let me just pivot just a little bit to ask you about, you know, as we moved on into 2020 in the election cycle, and as much as we can, because we run nonpartisan C3 voter engagement organizations, so our work clearly is about making sure everybody has an opportunity to vote, has access. And so, you know, just thinking about, like, as we moved into the latter part of that year, and, you know, how, in fact, typically, you know, things, we hope, begin to sort of, we can start to slow down, but it didn't, it ramped up. And, like, how was that for you? I know how it was for me, but things had to ramp up, and it did. And, yeah.
Yeah, I think as we got closer to the fall, the pressure came back up. For us to essentially strong arm our partners, as if we're not in relationship, right? But strong arm our partners to go back into the field and knock doors. There was a lot of spoken and unspoken pressure. And, I see my job as being accountable and responsive to the table partners, right? I am blessed to be able to call y'all and text y'all about anything, right? Because it's a real relationship. And it was made clear to me, Tamieka, we don't want to go out into this field. Now, some folks did, but it was their choice.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to feel beholden that they're required. And so I saw my job that fall was to hold the line.
Yeah.
Was to hold the line on behalf of the table partners while simultaneously raising money
Yeah.
to double down and triple down on the relational organizing,
Yeah.
the work that we've already been doing before it was called relational organizing, so that folks are doing the phone banking and the text banking, the social media, the COVID safe events, that our partners had the resources and the tools like Women Engaged to partner with food banks, to have materials on voter engagement with PPE included, right? Like we're caring for our people as they vote, right? That is what we're doing. And so, it definitely was exhausting.
Yeah.
It was exhausting. And, I think in a lot of ways, and I think you know this, like towards November, when some of the Black women were named publicly, that changed a lot.
Yeah.
That changed a lot.
Yeah.
And you already know I'm a fiercely private person.
Yeah.
So it was something else to know to have to, for the public to have some sort of ownership, right?
Yes.
And to and I think for me it was a struggle.
Yeah.
Right. I'm already dealing with the pandemic and COVID. My girls and my mom, who has diabetes, and so we all had to make sure that we were as careful as possible. The intensity around the fall, and then because I want to be accountable and I do this work I love.
Yeah.
Using this newfound interest to raise as much money as possible for our partners. It was a lot, and again, I couldn't have done it if I tried to do it on my own.
Yeah.
I was able to rely on folks like you, right? Like Helen Butler, right? Like Stephanie Cho, like Lang Lang from 9 to 5. Like I was able to, I'm a part of a community. But again, we all influence each other.
Yes.
Right? I think what we have here in Georgia, to have such phenomenal women of color leaders that are interdependent, supportive of each other, and I think progressive and innovative. We have a vision, right, of what it would look like for our needs to be met.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's a part of the recipe. Of of Pro Georgia, and again, we never had a board chair, right? You remember we had the IRS required positions, right? Like secretary and treasurer, and you were our first board chair, and there was no model for that.
No.
There's no model for that, right? And you stepped into it with both feet.
I did.
And it was a lot of work.
What was wonderful, it's been amazing. What I didn't know at the time that I learned later is that when I was elected as board chair of Pro Georgia, at the time, not only was I the first board chair of Pro Georgia, but I was the first Black woman leader who leads a reproductive justice organization anywhere in the country to be able to lead a civic engagement table in that position as chair. And I didn't know that until much later, that was also a breakthrough within that network to do that. And so when I think about all that we've been able to accomplish through that, with the partnership of Women Engaged and Pro Georgia, it is really quite a story, and it is quite amazing in that way. And I do think about the ways in which the nourishing and the nurturing, because I think it's, for me, that's also key of planting the seeds within our communities to do that work consistently, but also nourishing our relationships with each other, as you mentioned, with other women of color leaders in the state who are doing this kind of work, because we are interdependent of each other, and that it did matter when we got to 2020 on so many levels, from not only the kinds of attacks that whether it was cyber kind of attacks that we had to sort of deal with, countering the kind of misinformation and the disinformation campaigns that were out there around voter engagement at the time to make sure that people felt confident to still be able to go and vote. You know, Women Engaged alone talked to over and provided direct resources to over 800 families in Georgia around the COVID crisis. We were able to, you know, of course, get out the kind of social media that was really geared towards, you know, Black voters under the age of 50, particularly, you know, younger voters, to make sure that, hey, you can vote by mail, it's fine. You're gonna be able to early vote. This is how you do it, you know, and get those kinds of messages out. And it mattered and it worked. And what we saw in Georgia, obviously in 2020, which was, you know, important is that we saw a high number of younger voters participating both early as well as on election day. And what a lot of people don't know is that, you know, in Georgia, we had 2 runoffs, you know, that ran through the December holidays into the new year. And we were able to make sure, you know, that voters got back out and didn't quit and, you know, and did do that. And it's such a powerful story. And I see your little smile. And so I'm wondering if you have any kind of like thoughts about like, you know, like what does it mean? Especially because a lot of people don't want to bet on younger voters to turn back out or show up again. And we're like, yeah, but you've got to speak their language and you've got to also like be real. Like you can't just be like, oh, you need to do this, but it's like why and how and what does that mean ultimately? And I'm going to hold you accountable to those words, you know? So what does it, I guess, like, did that like moment mean for you after we get to, you know, the end of that cycle?
You know, Malika, we have at Pro Georgia, prior to me coming on, we have tried to have youth work groups in the past. And because, you know, that's how we do our work. We try to coordinate like around issue by having a monthly work group meeting. And, you know, we have our leaders there and they move forward our civic engagement work through a particular lens. And you know what, you know, because again, you know, I'm all about the lessons learned, right? And then you pivot and you do something, you try again, but you pivot with the lessons you've learned. And so prior to me coming on, there was a youth work group, and it was primarily fellows and interns that didn't necessarily have the power, the authority to approve any of the plans that were coming from the work group, right? And that's not, you know, that's not something new or unique, right? It's systemic, right? You know, not believing in young people, right? Until we want them to do something, right? And one of the things I've learned in 2020, we had, you're gonna laugh at this, you know I like my acronyms and my names. And so for the runoff, you know, we have a communications firm that supports the partners and the table. And also, I was like, you know what? Both me and the comms firm, right? We're 38, 39. I'm technically a millennial, but like only on paper. And, you know, I was brainstorming with my staff and they said, we want to take on some additional work. We want to, and so this is my staff that's 27 and under.
Right.
We want to lead and support outreach and social media efforts to young people in Georgia for the runoff. And so they are affectionately named the Stay Relevant Crew, the SRC.
I love that.
And, you know, without them, we wouldn't have had, I think, the culturally relevant memes and posts and information and videos, right? And then they worked very closely with the folks at Women Engaged, right? As a matter of fact, some of your leaders did trainings at monthly canvasser trainings on how to prioritize and reach young voters of color, right? And so, you know, I think that made a world of difference for me, right? And others like me to get out of the way. Right? And when I think about the impact on us now and the future intention, you know, we're looking at developing a youth work group again, this time in partnership with youth. And our goal is for this work group to have its own budget.
That's right.
Already set aside. There's no approval from anyone.
Yeah.
They just determine what work needs to happen. So now as an organization, as a coalition, we are getting out of the way. And that's
Yeah.
one of the lessons I've learned
Yeah.
over this past year. And so
Yeah.
I'm excited to see how we can better be of support,
Yeah.
right? How we can better be of resource and,
Yeah.
you know, step out the way, open the door, make that access for young people to lead in real, authentic, powerful ways,
Yeah.
and not just in name only.
I love it. So I think this is good, and I think this brings me to like my last question. And a way for us to, I think, close out this conversation is really thinking about what we're really excited about for like the next 7 years. You know, what brings us joy? You know, like what brings you joy? When you think about, yeah, our work, you know, what we've been able to accomplish, but where we're going. And I think it's just so powerful what you just said about, you know, making sure that there's like this authentic partnership with new leadership, emerging leadership, with a budget, with money, not just in talk, not just when I want to like have young people, you know, whatever, but, you know, do something for us through social media, but really with funding to push work, you know, their ideas and things forward. So like building off of that, you know, like, I guess, yeah, what do you really see moving forward? What brings you joy?
What brings me joy? Okay. What brings me joy? My children are right now in a Black Freedom School, Quilombo Institute for Cultural and Academic Development. And I can't begin to tell you how I've seen the transformation in them and in me. I think this is the first time I've ever seen strong-willed girls used as an affirmation
Yeah.
and as a positive description.
Yes.
You know, my babies come home singing songs about freedom fighters, right? And it just brings me so much joy to. I just wonder, they're going to have a range of opportunities.
Yep.
They're going to be able to access more in their spirit, right? Earlier on than their mom. And I am just so joyful that they are in this school, that we get to be a part of this community. And I really do look forward to who they are in another 7 years. Just about this joy part.
Yes.
You know, what brings me joy in this work is, you know, I've had setbacks.
Yeah.
And again, you don't take it personal, it's just data, and you learn. If you're
Yep.
honest, you can learn, right?
Yep.
And I'm not gonna lie, it is nice to be affirmed
Yes.
when there are naysayers that say,
That's right.
you can't bring, you shouldn't bring children to a board meeting. What do you mean you
Amen.
wanna, okay, what do you mean you wanna fund childcare for table trainings? What do you mean you wanna feed them something that is not Subways, right? Right, all true stories.
That's right.
And, you know, to center communities of color, to center marginalized folks who more often than not are the targets of voter suppression. To just be unapologetic, honestly, about my Blackness.
That's right. Come on.
Even in my conversations
right.
with funders. It's nice to be right. I'm not gonna lie.
That's right. That's right.
And so I look at the next 7 years,
Yes.
right? To me, now the goal is how do I continue working with my network of women of color, right? So that we can replicate
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah.
That's what I'm really interested in for the next 7 years.
Yeah.
Because I tell you what, by the time that November election was over, January runoff of 2021, by Women's History Month, we started to see the retraction from the funding world. Well, are you sure that strategy makes sense? Well, it doesn't match, you know, what we've been taught. It's not by the books. And so what we were lauded for in 2020, but ridiculed for in 2019 and before, already we see the retraction in trusting the leadership of Black women. Right? And so this is our opportunity, and it brings me joy, and it makes me enthusiastic, and it makes me passionate.
Yeah.
How do we replicate as many women of color leaders who are unafraid
Yep.
and authentic in this work. That brings me joy.
Yeah.
And to me, I don't see them separate from my personal joy.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? There's nothing like seeing a range of opportunity, in our future.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I'm so happy you brought up your girls. I'm so happy you did that. And I'm so happy because that's the thing. I think for me, when I look over our last 7 years working together, when I think about the next 7 years, I think the piece that we did, and I think we agreed to that, is that we were gonna we're only doing this work if we can bring our whole selves. We have to be able to bring our whole selves. That's the way we're going to do this. We are intellectuals. We are fighters. We are moms. We are sisters. We are daughters. And there wouldn't be different things that I'd come to you, you'd be doing for Pro Georgia, or I'm doing, and we wouldn't see each other's moms. Now my baby's 3 years old, but now she's, part of that joy, right? And that is so true because for too long, especially as Black women leaders, the requirement to compartmentalize and to only be allowed to, bring parts of yourself into your work. And you cannot talk about or be able to even take some time off if the baby's sick or things like that, or even to take care of yourself or to be able to say that. I think that's one of the reasons why it was so important to me that you take that month off, because we have to be able to do that. And I think that to me has been some of the key. And that brings me joy when I think about like the next 7 years for Women Engaged, is that we will continue to be like on that forefront of making sure that Black women, femmes, and girls can bring their whole selves into whatever they choose to do, including this political space, especially in this political space, that it is okay. And even when the backlash comes, because it does, even when your vulnerability gets used against you, because it does, that you don't have to then feel ashamed that you were vulnerable or that you brought your full self, including your heart, into what you believe in, into your work, into your strategizing, and into doing the kinds of our due diligence and our efforts. That does bring me joy and excitement, and we as Women Engaged just will continue to do that, kind of like have that at the forefront of our values. And I thank you for spending this time with me today, because I just had an opportunity to all the things that we've been able to do together, and there's so much more. Yes. But it's exciting. It's exciting. But let me just say this last thing, and that is that I think one of the other brave things that you've done that supported me, and I just want to name this because, for others who are listening, especially other Black women leaders, is that we had as a board chair, as your board chair and as executive director, had a really important conversation about pay and worth and value. Ooh. And that was so critical. We had to have that conversation because I believed that intellectually. I knew that it was so important that we needed to immediately get you a salary raise and do the kinds of things we needed to do. At the same time, I know I was dealing with internalized things around, because not necessarily about the worth, but how do we do it? How do we get that done? And also knowing what I was sacrificing and doing. And it was that breakthrough for me. And I thank you to be able to say, no, I'll show you. Let's open it up. We could do the quick research and know that for what we do and hold as CEOs, as executive directors, comparative to colleagues who are male or colleagues who are not of color, colleagues who are not Black women, for example, they're making significantly more, and it is not okay. And so we got that done. We got that done together, and I'm so grateful for you for that, because it's made a huge difference for my life, I know, for our work. And I know we've got some things coming down the pipe around, the two of us about, pay equity and the importance of that, why it matters to our humanity, our self-care, and all of those things, but also how we advocate for each other around that. And so it's so important. So I thank you. I'm so glad we had this chance to really talk. And thank you for celebrating with me the 7 years of Women Engaged. This is like so cool. And I'm looking forward to 7 more years, and on and on and on and on and on, and more and more and more. We're really just getting started. The two of us, our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Malika.